I asked questions to CSGO experts to see if we could finally settle who was the better player in 2020, s1mple or ZywOo. HLTV ranked ZywOo number 1 in 2020, but unlike in 2021, in 2020, the ranking was hotly debated in the community. This year, you'd probably have an easier time finding someone who hates Taco than someone who didn't have s1mple as number 1. And let's be real, who doesn't love Taco? I did an interview with him and I just had a smile on my face the whole damn time. So I figured instead of the boring 2021 debate, I would reignite this older debate around HLTV's choice of ZywOo at number 1 in 2020. Huge thanks to the experts I reached out to for helping out. I've been loving the CSGO content and community lately, and you should definitely check out everyone in this video, linked down below. Alright, let's get into it. I started by asking everyone what they valued most when ranking a player at the end of the year. Launders is a caster and content creator.
What's popular YouTube? Another day, another demo.
Who specializes in watching players' demos. And he said stats aren't quite as relevant for him, especially with the usual candidates that he has seen play a lot throughout the year. For the elite players, as long as the stats were somewhat comparable, he would look first at who he felt was the better player throughout the year, and then secondly, who had better or worse teammates. And he also said that MVPs didn't matter as much to him. It wouldn't be a video of CSGO experts if I didn't include Thorin. The esports historian has been in the scene for all of CSGO, and he is my go-to personally for longer form content in his videos and in his podcasts on his channel.
You know how I rock it, boys. Gamer subs!
God damn, Thorin's so good at plugs, he managed to sneak one onto my channel. Fair play, Thorin, I see you. He said he values the eye test first, as he believes it's very rare for a player who has better stats, but the worst eye test, to actually be better. And usually in those scenarios, it suggests the team structure or resources are what propped this player up. Second, he looks at what team they played in, how good it is, and the overall roles and how the resources are distributed. And then thirdly and finally, he does look at stats to give an idea of how a player played over an enormous sample size, but he said that stats are more of a compass than a map for him. They point him in the right direction, but they don't get him exactly where he's going. He's more interested in the eye test. For me, King T is one of the most underrated and underappreciated content creators we have in Counter-Strike right now.
I tried to get him into prospects earlier, but I made the mistake of allowing the show to be a democracy. The democratic era is over. Long live the king.
He may currently have 786 subs, but he has watched loads of demos and has a well thought through framework as to how he approaches the game. His prospect series especially stands out, where he looks at the up-and-coming CS players you may not have heard of in a nice snappy format. And he personally recommends his video on Torzi, which he made 6 months ago before Torzi was moved up to the main Mouse roster. And that might be a good one to check out so you guys can get an idea of what he may be like now that he's been moved up to the main squad. King T said he values stats in certain contexts and says the elite players need to perform in the biggest moments, so he weighs performances differently based on the context of the match overall. Maui Snake is a boomer who took way too long setting up his camera and mic.
Up at all. I haven't really set my room up at all, so because I just had to leave immediately once I got in. Okay. Also, I don't know why my webcam is like giving you like fucking rays like that, you know? I have no idea what's happening. Okay, you can hear me though, right? I can't even hear through my headphones right now. I'm just wearing them for looks. Yes, it's going out through the laptop speakers. Whatever. Who cares?
Sorry, Maui. Didn't mean to do you dirty like that. But more importantly, Maui is one of the best broadcast analysts we have right now, as well as being a content creator, where over on his channel you can expect player discussion, sometimes some player analysis, and also his It's Server Time podcast. For him, he said he valued big games the most.
When we judge players throughout history, there's one simple fact that stands above everything else. The big games matter the most.
ZywOo is CSGO's resident fanfic writer and content creator, with way more subs than me, so he probably doesn't need a shout out from me, but he's getting one anyway, as he makes a nice mix of great general Counter-Strike content, while also including the esports side of things too.
Weirdly enough, with us two, it's the paradox, okay? Your team never tries to control long A, and the opposing team are fucking savants.
That's a fucking amazing savant!
Like they're playing a fucking major final.
Like King T, he also said he values the difference in stats when in the biggest events or competing against the top teams. And finally, Paladin is another smaller CSGO content creator who definitely deserves to be here and definitely deserves a shout out. Over on his channel, he makes esports discussion content as well as some demo analysis, and he specifically recommends his video titled Unsung Heroes of Counter-Strike, Shoosh. And as someone who is a massive Shoosh fan myself and really appreciates what he provides to Heroic, Paladin's clearly a man after my own heart. He said he had to weigh up two factors when making this decision.
I have to look at either one of two things, either the titles that the said player had won, or how that player was able to get the team to the close enough chance to winning that title.
With ZywOo being the one who won more events, but s1mple getting his arguably weaker team to far in tournaments a lot of the time. So now we know what the experts value the most, we have to talk about the regional tournaments that differed between these two. When ranking ZywOo as number 1, HLTV included the EU RMRs as big events, but they didn't include the CIS RMRs, which gave ZywOo 3 extra events played throughout the year, including 2 of his 4 MVPs in these EU major qualifier events. Thorin argued this factor did have to go in favor of ZywOo, as even though now CIS has quite a lot of top teams, the EU RMR back then was most of the best teams in the world. And King T also echoed this point, saying he agreed that CIS GO didn't come through until 2021, and so ZywOo does deserve the extra weight and extra credit for his performance at these events. ZywOo also agreed and counted this a decent amount, but he went on to further point out that for him, the biggest negative for s1mple is his lack of team success and specifically individual success in these CIS-only events, which in theory should have been the easier events for him to win and dominate in throughout the year. Next, I asked how important they found overall team success when making their decision. And King T says he tries to avoid it as he wanted to judge the players by themselves, but he found it impossible to do so because CS is inherently a team game. What mattered most to him was figuring out how much of the credit every individual player should deserve for their team's success. We heard from Maui earlier, and he focused more on the events which mattered most to him and the level of dominance in those events.
The big games matter the most. And for s1mple, the biggest games were the ones that he delivered in 2020. IEM Katowice was the crowning event of the year, as there was no major, and in that event, he dominated.
Meanwhile, Thorin said he thinks there is something to be said for playing a smaller sample size of games because your team sucks, and also that if you are on a phenomenal team, sometimes that can scale up and actually boost your stats slightly because you're winning so often. But he went on to say he only thinks it's really a big deal when talking about a player like ropz, who realistically probably shouldn't be winning events with his team, but could in theory be a top 5 player on any given day. ZywOo agreed that it's impossible to say that team success doesn't matter, but he tried not to weight it too heavily. For example, this year, he actually rates NiKo above Shiro, despite having worse team success, because he thinks NiKo's team had enough success, and that the success that they did have was massively because of him. Coach Lau also said the race between NiKo and ZywOo for him this year was close, and he actually initially had NiKo as number 2, but he ended up switching. He said that if NiKo had the stats, NiKo would have been number 2 this year, no question, as a rifler, and probably the best rifler of all time in CS. But he went with ZywOo as he rifled a significant amount while also being an elite AWPer, but most importantly, he simply thinks ZywOo is, and has proved, he was a better player than NiKo. Launders also accounts for quality of teammates. For example, NiKo had Hunter, who Launders also put into the top 10, while ZywOo didn't have any players on his team that even made Launders top 20. Paladin also accounted for quality of teammates,
but ZywOo was able to still put on quite a hell of a show throughout that first half. Now, the second half, ZywOo had a little bit of a dip in form, but that wasn't necessarily because he was playing bad, but he had the 6-man roster to actually bolster the system of Vitality, and the results started coming in, so they started winning a lot more titles. But ZywOo, as a player, didn't need to have those carry jobs that he was showing in the first half of 2020.
And went on to also theorize which team had a better system and which team potentially could have still been replaceable and have that team still find some success.
I don't think if you slotted out s1mple and you put in somebody else, I don't think you could have put Na'Vi at those same heights and provide those clutches that s1mple provided and those consistent multi-frags that he is so well known for. As compared to Vitality, I think the system was so integral that you could have slotted out ZywOo and put in a different AWPer in that situation. You might have had less clutches perhaps, but the stars that were on Vitality at the time, Nivera and Masuta, were such key pieces. They were actually quite consistent at that point in time.
So, you've heard all the reasoning. Now it's time for the fun bit, the final choices. We'll start with Maui Snake, and I'll let him do the talking for his point.
The big games matter the most. And for s1mple, the biggest games were the ones that he delivered in 2020. IEM Katowice was the crowning event of the year, as there was no major, and in that event, he dominated. So my vote is s1mple, and that's pretty easy.
So, that's 1-0 s1mple, and Thorin also agreed and picked s1mple as his best player of 2020. He thought the eye test checks out better, and that s1mple had to do a lot more with a less coherent and worse-led team. He added that s1mple had some truly transcendent performances, even in tournaments where he finished simply second, or even sometimes just top 4. 2-0 to s1mple, over to ZywOo, who picked ZywOo because he likes that it rhymes. Okay, no, not really. Seriously, he said he does rate s1mple's Katowice run highly, but he also argued you can track and predict the placings at Katowice based on the teams that played at the ICE Challenge tournament to start the year. He also thought that Katowice was the first true event of the season and that a lot of teams came into the event cold, and concluded by saying overall the rating is almost a coin flip, to the point where if he didn't have this asterisk against Katowice, s1mple would have been his number 1, but ZywOo just about edged it for it. 2-1 to s1mple. Let's let Paladin go ahead and tell you why he made his decision.
So overall, actually, before I started having this discussion and researching this, I actually decided that ZywOo was probably the better player this year. But as soon as I started looking over the stats and the placements of each of these players, I clearly understood that s1mple had much more of an impact to bring Na'Vi to relevancy this year, or in 2020, as compared to ZywOo, who was able to show up in the first half, but in the second half he just wasn't needed that same extent that s1mple was. And for that reason, I'll put s1mple actually over ZywOo this year
So that's 3-1 to s1mple, who is, I guess, kind of on map point in this weird system we're doing. And King T comes in clutch to keep ZywOo in it. He said he actually really thought he would pick s1mple, but looking back on a pretty chaotic 2020, he does think ZywOo was the correct choice. He says Vitality's successes were all built on the shoulders of the giant that was ZywOo. And while s1mple was a titan in his own right, he didn't quite have to shoulder the same burden as his French rival. So that's 3-2 to s1mple, and our final expert is Launders, who said that by HLTV's criteria, he thinks ZywOo did deserve to be number 1, but for his own personal criteria, he chose s1mple as number 1, and so I think s1mple has to take it here with a 4-2 split. I think Launders' point is a good summary, that by HLTV's criteria, looking pretty heavily towards stats, the ZywOo pick makes sense, but I think for a lot of people on their own personal criteria, they probably would pick s1mple. Let me know what you guys think down below, who you agree with, who you disagree with, and again, make sure to check out everyone who has helped out on this video, and a huge thank you to everyone who took their time to answer my questions. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed a slightly different video. If you want more of my standard content, I'm always plugging my video I made on Nico, which will be up over here. And then YouTube thinks you'll like this video here. Oh, and also, if you made it to the end, why not subscribe? You can't have hated the video that much. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.